So we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about hopefully, I don't know if it's everybody's favorite subject or if it's the subject that everybody's tired of, one of the two. But we're going to talk about AI in the HR world, but very specific approach I have. Now, clearly, since you guys aren't Zoom signed into Zoom and it's just this one, you should be able to see a QR code on the side of the presentation. Go ahead and scan that with your phone. Or you can go to the URL on here. We have a handful of poll questions that we'll use. And so that way you can engage off of the phone and you should be able to see that on the screen right now. And so as we're going through, that way you can jump in. You'll see as we get in here, I have a few questions. And so, but today we're going to talk specifically about ChatGPT. Are we all good, Jody? Oh, remote.
We can't see your slides.
All right, excellent. So yeah, you can just scan that QR code. Will stay there through the whole meeting, so you guys can sign up as we go along. But as we kind of jump in here, I always like to make sure people know who they're listening to. I think a lot of times we may have consultants that speak to us about hiring, but don't actually hire their own people. And so yeah, Jody was just saying she would look back and saw that she'd been talking to me back in 2017. I actually got into the HR space in 2005. So me, Indeed was just launching about that same time. Bamboo HR was just launching. A lot of the names that you know and engage with today, we're kind of launching it around that same time. And so over the last, I built a company in the last 20 years called Applicant Pro that helps employers with hiring. I think right now Applicant Pro is used by around 10,000 organizations, probably 300 to 400 cities and counties, as well as pretty much everybody else you can think of. But along with kind of building software and helping employers, I also had to build my own company. And so we scaled from, one part-time mom when I started in 2005 to when I left about a year and a half ago, we were just about 300 employees. And as you can imagine, as a bootstrapped startup, meaning I used the 40,000 bucks that I put into the company in the first 2 years, and that's all the money that we put into it from zero to $35 million a year in revenue. And so we had a pretty difficult time from a recruiting standpoint. We were in middle of Utah. They like to call it Silicon Slopes. Heavy invested area for tech, which means it's extremely competitive when it comes to hiring. But when I left, the numbers along the bottom, super important to understand. When I left, we were getting 450 applicants per hire and 20 employee referrals. And that wasn't because we were spending money. And it'll make more sense as we get into talking about ChatGPT about how AI can help with that. But just so you know up front, let's test this out. If you can, make sure you scan this in. So my very first question, what's your favorite coffee shop? I know you guys are down in Florida. I believe you just got your first or second Dutch Bros. It's where my daughter works, which is kind of I don't know what you want to call it. The middle teen, 20-year-old something Starbucks that's a little bit much more rowdy. We'll go with much more rowdy and fun than Starbucks. But this is an important question, and so you can throw it in here. Clearly, Starbucks is the 80-pound gorilla in the room. But it's interesting that all of us, or many of us, I would say, have come to use our morning coffee, our mid-morning coffee, our lunch coffee, as our way to build up energy for us to do our jobs because we have a heavy burden to carry, especially in HR. And so you'll see the kind of comparison as we start working through this presentation today that maybe we need less caffeine and instead allocate some of that money to, I don't know, ChatGPT, because it can give us more energy at work. And that really is, how do we become more efficient? For most of us, the burden is pretty high. I would assume cities and counties don't exactly have unlimited resources. And in almost every organization, even those with a lot of money, HR tends to be overworked and understaffed. Probably the easy way to put it is that we just have so much to do. And I think it's actually getting, worse, not better. Especially at least on the hiring side, where unemployment is maybe ticking up a little bit, and AI specifically is making it quite a bit easier for job seekers to apply for jobs. So if you can imagine, if you've been seeing an increase in your applicant flow, but maybe not an increase in the quality, it may not be that there's more, or not an increase in engagement, how excited job seekers are. It's probably not that there's way more applicants out there, as much as it is that it's way easier for the average applicant to apply for 5 times or 10 times as many jobs as they used to. And so as we kind of jump in, I have a couple of kind of core questions here just to give me an idea of where we're at from an HR standpoint in the room. Do we have a team? Is it just us? Do I have a little bit of help like an assistant? That's very different than a team. I'm not in HR at all. Maybe I'm a city manager or something along those lines. I was just out in San Diego about, a month ago, speaking to a similar group to you guys. And so I have some data as we start looking at this. I just, as much engagement as we can get on a few of these questions, it will really allow us to understand kind of what's going on. Now, I don't know how much you've had speakers in there about AI. But the event I was just at in San Diego, I'll tell you what it's normally like at, say, a SHRM event. Number one, they had a lawyer come in and talk about AI, which was really interesting because it was mostly, it was interesting because the number one phrase I heard out of the lawyer's mouth is, if you choose to use AI. And that was something you would only hear from a lawyer, of if you choose, like it's a choice to not, right? Now, normally that's followed up with a software person, and software guys tend to be very visionary, head in the clouds. Oh my gosh, it's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's going to completely change the world of work. And most likely you won't have a job in the future because AI will do it for you. And I guess you're supposed to be excited about that. But I tend to, in this presentation specifically, as we go through this, is going to be very functional and specific about ChatGPT. And so as we look at this, like, what are your priorities in the next 90 days? I'll try to guide the examples we show in here based off this. So if your priorities are, hey, we've got to hire more people, or we've got to figure out how to onboard, or we've got, just a burden of, I know we're going through open enrollment right now, which is a ton of work and a ton of communication. It could be performance, whatever it is. What's that project you're working on? Especially if you think about it from things where you say we type more than a few words, right? Usually my cutoff for ChatGPT is something like 20. If I'm going to sit down my computer and I'm going to type more than 20 words in a row, I most likely should be using ChatGPT and not typing. And so just think about that for a minute. More than 20 words is actually a habit problem for most of us, in that our habit is, I'm going to open up Microsoft Word, I'm going to open up a document, or I'm going to open up an email, or maybe an email just got sent to me and I'm about to reply to it, and I start typing. And at some point I'm like, man, I bet ChatGPT could make this easier. Too bad I didn't start there first. Pay plan update. Excellent. Like, all of these things, when you think about it, have a substantial amount of content that's required. And so as we're talking about ChatGPT today, just keep in mind, I think a lot of times, if you listen to the news, if you get emails, if you, follow influencers, if somebody comes and speaks, they're really focused on the things that AI can do that software companies want it to do. So for instance, hiring for you, interviewing for you, making decisions for you, automating things and removing you from the process of it happening. And the reason why that is such a mostly talked about thing is because that's how software companies make money, is by going out to the world and saying, we're going to change the way people work, and we're going to have our system do it instead of you. And it's interesting because, number one, it freaks everybody out, especially the core users. Because if I go tell an employee that I'm going to provide software that takes their job away, that's not exactly exciting to the employee who used to do the job. Number two, this is where the majority of the bias and legality and concerns about those types of things come into play, is when we're having a computer go and do things for us without us being a part of it. And the more important thing is it jumps over a whole lot of really powerful and important things that you could use AI to do today as your assistant, as your collaborator, as a tool similar to Excel, not a tool that works on its own. And so most of this presentation, as we're running through this, I'm going to be focused on the how could you use ChatGPT as a extension of yourself, not as a replacement for yourself. Because when it's an extension of us, similar to Excel, similar to a word processor, similar to a search engine, similar to an ATS, we're still in control. We're still the ones validating things. We're checking its work. We're making sure that we decide what things it's used for and what things it doesn't. So why is there so much talk about AI? This right here is what we call the hype cycle. And this is what we go through literally on any new technology, period. Rocket ship that's going to launch satellites, whether it's the internet, whether it's email, whether it's an ATM machine, and yes, whether it's AI, we go through this hype cycle. And so you see kind of on the far left, really smart people invent technology, and then they need to go and gather together fans, either that want to work with them or fans that want to invest in them. And normally that requires them talking a whole lot about the infinite potential of what this new technology could do in the future. Not what it will do, but what it could do in the future. And that's where you hear all of this hype. It's actually part of the evolutionary process of a technology, is we need that hype in order to get people excited to go and figure out, of all the things it could do, what things it can actually do and what things it should actually do. But what happens is we then experience this huge like disappointment phase where it doesn't work the way they said it would. And a lot of times you'll hear people say it doesn't do what they promised it would do. That's because you assumed that hype of it could was a promise, not a potential prediction. There's a difference between what's potential, what's a prediction, and what's a promise. And a lot of consumers get upset or sad or whatever the case may be, whether you say, oh, Elon's Teslas don't go as far as he said they would go, or, oh, like the Cybertruck isn't bulletproof, and Elon projected or predicted it would be, but we assume it was a promise. It will do these things, and it leads us to this disillusionment. But at some point, we end up here on this flat line. So if you go back, just think back 15 years ago, when applicant tracking systems were coming out and starting to get adopted, the majority of cities and counties didn't use one at all. The ATS vendor said, this will utterly change your life. It will do everything for you. It didn't do all those things, but it did do enough of them that we end up over here today in this kind of like plateau of productivity. Most of the cities and counties in the room, I guarantee, have an ATS. I would bet half of you are using NeoGov, and the rest are using some variation of either a payroll provided one or a standalone one, like, you know, Applicant Pro or whatever the case may be. But think back, we went through this same exact cycle. It happens every single time. Now, the thing to really understand is over here on the right, what we call the product adoption curve. This is what type of person are you? And if you, this is normally a bell curve with very few tech enthusiasts and visionaries on the front side who are willing to buy stuff. We'll go with, we buy stuff that's broken. It's not that it's broken because it's bad. It's just broken because it hasn't evolved enough yet. So We might buy ChatGPT back, a year and a half ago in its very early stages where it maybe didn't work the way it should have worked, or it wasn't fully evolved as a product, or it didn't have a lot of the bugs worked out of it. And we buy it not because we need perfect, but because we want to be the person using something new. At some point back on the backside, it becomes, the mainstream market starts adopting it, or you get back here on skeptics. Now, stop and ask yourself, and I won't ask you to say it out loud, where do you fit on this? When you think about compared to the other people in the room, you might say, hey, I'm kind of an early adopter. But generally speaking, lawyers, accountants, HR folks, anybody that spends at least half their day dealing with compliance and legality and that type of stuff, we tend to be back here on the back side of this in the skeptic area. We adopt new technology once it's fully proven and almost perfected. That's not a knock on those professions. It's just inherent in the risk aversion that a lot of people in those professions have. But if too much of the industry is skewed back on that backside, we don't actually ever adopt new technology at all. So as we're kind of where I'm going to try to jump through here, I have 2 questions, and then we'll actually jump into ChatGPT, and I'll kind of explain how to go about doing it. Question number 1, what comes to mind when I say ChatGPT at work? 1 or 2 words. It doesn't have to be very long. It can be literally like positive or negative. I'm just looking for honesty. When somebody starts talking about, oh my gosh, I can use ChatGPT at work, a lot of times the words that would show up here might be cheating, plagiarism, a confidentiality, right? It formulates my thoughts and saves time. Those are both sound positive. Confidentiality, ooh, that sounds like a risk thing. Misuse, that sounds like a risk. Confusion, right? Cheating or creating a posting, lazy. So just think about, as people are putting these words up, I want you to just stop, and as you look at each one, say, is that a positive thing that they were saying? They were implying a positive outcome. It helps with something. Writing an email, policy writing. Those are not always positive or negative. Those are things it could be used for. Exciting sounds positive. Confusion, misuse, cheating, that sounds negative, right? And we as humans in the workforce right now, and as humans, period, can really be divided between this, like, I have a positive sentiment of how this is going to help, and I have a negative sentiment about what this is going to do. If we were in the education system, you'd hear a lot more negative on the it's cheating. In the business world, copying is a good example, right? Let's go with this kind of lazy, plagiarism, cheating thing, right? I would almost guarantee that based off of the societal terms of what is plagiarism or cheating, everybody in the room is a cheater. Let me just ask this one question. The last time that you posted a job that you did not have a description for, how did you write the job description? Did you start with a clean document, start at the top, and literally type out the whole thing? Or did you go search online and find a template from SHRM, or borrow a template from another city or county? You went to Indeed, searched for that same job, copied and pasted it into Word, and made changes. By the high school and college definition of cheating, y'all are cheaters, right? Like, based off that definition. Now, in the business world, y'all are following best practice, because it is not best practice to reinvent the wheel every single time we do something in the business world. And so that, as we're looking at this, now I've got one more question. I'll explain these 2 together. Please rate your ChatGPT usage. Now, on the downside, what is it? Never seen it. I've never used it. I've logged in before, but didn't actually use it. Maybe I've messed around a little bit. I use it every single month. I use it every day. I use it all day long. Like, on the far side where we're wizard, that means you actually built GBTs. You've actually built apps with it. So here's the interesting thing: is everybody gets a chance to vote. I've asked these 2 questions, the one before of what do you think about, and what comes to mind, and your usage. And here's what I can tell you: when I think I'm at probably 1,000 HR people have answered those 2 questions for me in the last year. Here's what the data says when I combine those 2. and yes, plug it into ChatGPT and have it analyze it for me. It basically says the more that you use ChatGPT, the less skeptical and negative you are about it. The less you've used it, the more afraid you are of it. So just stop and think about that for a minute. What does that say about, generally speaking, not perfectly speaking, but generally speaking, about ChatGPT for HR people? If you're afraid of it, afraid it's going to take our job, afraid it's evil, afraid it does bad things, afraid it hallucinates, afraid it's inaccurate, afraid it's stealing the data, the cure for that fear is to use it. Because the more HR people use it, the less afraid they are and the more excited they are. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, but just keep that in mind as we're going through this. So my goal today is to explain kind of how to use it and how to think about it. And the very first part, and this is the hardest thing for organizations and especially technical people to do, is I'm not looking for 100%, this works perfect and replaces the human. I'm looking for the 80-20 rule, meaning, can this get me 80% done so I can do the last 20%? So for instance, I'm not looking for a perfect job ad or a perfect job description or a perfect training program to immediately come out of ChatGPT that I turn around and full send without reading, reviewing, or editing. That's actually not my goal. That'd be great, and that's the goal of what all the AI guys say. But right now, if I could save 80% of my time on a given project, I would be ecstatic. I don't need to save 100% of my time. 80% would, heck, 20% would be a win. So that's number one. I want to look for the 80% of things that would save me a significant amount of time, keeping the 20% there of the human element, because that way I can make sure it's accurate, it's right, etc. Number two, I'm not going to pick projects that sound sexy or cool to use, either internally or based off of our managers or IT guys, and especially not based off of what's sexy to AI software owners and founders, right? Those guys are going to pick really scary stuff and really big problems to solve because it's how they get money. It's how they get funded. But in actuality, there's a whole lot of green projects. As an example, writing a job description that you're going to turn around and publish on your website, right? The information going into it is not private or secret because you're about to post it, right? Number one. Number two, the accuracy and important. I'm not worried about hallucinations because I'm assuming you're going to proof it. You're going to read it before you use it. And so when you think about projects like that, there's a whole lot of stuff like job descriptions and job ads and job questions and interview question guides, not doing the interview, but creating a list of questions for the manager to use on the interview. These are all green things, right? Writing 90 days of emails to send out to my new hires, green and green. The information in it, while we may not broadcast it to the world, if the world saw it, wouldn't be evil. It wouldn't destroy us, anything like that. Or I can move things here on the left from orange to yellow and yellow to green with a few tiny tweaks. For instance, if I want to analyze 5 people's resumes using ChatGPT, I could copy and paste everything after their name. If I'm worried about putting somebody's name and email address in ChatGPT, which again, logically you shouldn't be worried about because all that information's on the internet anyway, but I could reduce my worry about the information going in, either A, by not putting that in, or B, I'm going to show you a trick for it in a second here that dramatically lowers the worry about our information is going to go into their model. But this back one right here, and just to kind of nail this one, if you can't read the result from ChatGPT and know whether it's right or wrong, you shouldn't be using ChatGPT for it. So for instance, ChatGPT is not Google. It actually uses 18 times more energy to use ChatGPT as Google instead of using Google. So just from an energy standpoint, it's not very efficient. But number two, if I don't know which answer is right and wrong, I shouldn't be using ChatGPT to give me the right answer because I won't know when it's hallucinating or not. It's not my lawyer. It's not there to make my case and replace a lawyer. Now, what ChatGPT could do, and let's take a lawyer as a good example, ChatGPT could coach me on gathering all the information that my lawyer would need and in putting it together in a very concise format for my lawyer to read so that my lawyer would spend 3 hours instead of 20 hours. That would, again, 80-20. It would save me 80%, but it's not taking the place of the person who knows all the stuff. And so those are kind of the first two things. Employee journey, loads of content that needs to be created, loads of time spent in HR creating that content. ChatGPT, that is all low-hanging fruit, whether it's recruiting or onboarding or development, whether it's communicating, creating an employee newsletter, or on the marketing side, same exact thing. So I'm going to start walking through this, and this is our very first part, and then I'm going to jump into ChatGPT. The very first mistake that was made by OpenAI and by the engineers is calling the person who knows how to use ChatGPT a prompt engineer. The worst naming of a job ever. And the reason is the average person, I'm going to guess, in fact, I can see you guys, so you can raise your hands. Who in here desires to become an engineer sometime? Raise your hand if you're like, I would really like to be an engineer. None of us. So the idea of becoming a prompt engineer that has a word that doesn't sound like it fits into what we want to become harms us. Number two, prompt is a terrible word that's a computer word. We use prompts as programmers. Instead, I want you to think about this as we're going through this of, I want to become an AI conversationalist. I want to be really great at collaborating with AI in a conversational mode. So what does this look like? I'm going to show you this framework, and then we'll jump into ChatGPT and I'll explain it. Instead of going into ChatGPT, and I can actually show you here, and I could jump in here and say, I need to write a job description for a auditor, or we'll call this a county clerk, right? A normal prompt engineer would try to be writing this amazing prompt so that whatever came back was ready to go. And when you look at this information coming back and you say, well, that's kind of right, but not exactly right, you know, because some counties have 50 employees and some counties have 5,000 employees, and that is different from them. You see, when we're just thinking that I'm going to give it a prompt, and I'm going to receive back a finished product, what we're taking for granted is that ChatGPT knows everything about everything, but nothing about you. Think about this as the same way of, imagine I hired an HR assistant to come and help us at work. And this was the instructions I gave the HR assistant on day one. I need you to rewrite my job descriptions. Let's start with this X position. Go. What are the chances that that HR assistant would come back with a finished product that you love? I'm going to guess very low. They'd come back with something that you're like, well, that's one way to approach it. And I can see how you got there. But, you know, here at XYZ County or XYZ City, that's not how we do things. So you need to go back and adjust it based off of how we do things, or based off of what I wanted you to do. And if you were to fire that employee in the first 20 minutes of them on the job, because they didn't give you the right answer to a question of, I need you to write a job description for this position, and that's all the backstory you gave them, that would be your fault, not theirs. Because clearly you didn't set them up for success. So when we think about ChatGPT, I want you to think about it like it's a new assistant that you hired. It's just crazy smart. So what does that mean? Well, when I give an assistant or give an employee or give somebody a project, I kind of follow this pattern of, look, I need your help with this specific project. And the more information about the project, the better. What do you need to know about that project? Well, you need to know, here's some examples of other ones we've done in the past. Here's the context about what we're trying to accomplish. Here's the backstory of why we're doing the project at all. Here's the resources that we've gathered about it. Here's where to go look for more information, right? And so I'm going to show you how I go about doing this, of giving it my answers to those questions. And then I say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And the most important part is giving feedback on the result. So when we think about, if we're not going to be a prompt engineer, and I go back to this same exact piece and say, wait a minute, I want you, so I'm going to start this as a conversation. I'm actually going to have a back and forth conversation with ChatGPT. I'm not just going to make a demand, right? So if you think about a normal prompt engineer who says, I'm going to load up this one prompt to rule them all, Like I'm going to write the best prompt ever. This prompt might need to be 6 pages long if what I wanted to do was take the very first response it gave me and say, that was perfect. I don't need anything else from you. Instead, I'll show you kind of how I go about this conversationally. I start, again, I need your help with the project of rewriting all of our job descriptions for our city, right? This is the project we're working on, right? And you can see now, because I'm treating it and talking to it like a human, it's going to talk back to me like a human. Maybe not an assistant, maybe like more like a consultant who's super smart. Yeah, I'd be happy to help you with this project. To get started, I need some more information from you. I need a list of the job titles. I need current job descriptions. I need specific requirements. I need information about the organization. I need to know what your priorities are, right? ChatGPT is actually getting better at how it responds. And my version, just so you know, probably acts differently than your version does. My version has about 3,000 hours of me building a relationship with it. And so it knows me pretty well that I'm going to want to give it more information. Now, if yours doesn't come back and say this, we go to step 2. What do you need to know? Now, this is like one of the biggest hacks to walk away from would be, even if it just said this right here, I could ask it, what would you need to know to help me write these job descriptions so that they will be specific and accurate for our unique city What do you need to know? It's super weird, but ask it what it needs to know. Now, it's going to give you an entire list of, look, I need to know this stuff about each role. I need to know this stuff about your employment policies. I need to know this stuff about your culture and values, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the hacks for this is, can you convert this into a list of questions that I can ask my team? We as humans do much better with questions than we do with statements or headings or something like that. We can't help but answer a question. So if I have ChatGPT give me a list of questions, then I can give it the answers. Now, this right here is we say, all right, here are my answers. This is one of the hacks, and I'll show you there's 2 ways to go about doing this. Instead of typing this, now imagine if I was going to type all this information in, I would most likely give short answers to these questions because nobody's got time to type in an entire book worth of information into ChatGPT to give it the backstory it needs. So there's 2 options that you have for how to go about using this. I'll show you option number 1. Oh, it's great. Zoom is so great at predicting what kind of things I want to show up on my thing. Anyway, so here's option number 1. It's otter.ai. I use Otter like all the time. In fact, it's probably called in this session right here. But what Otter allows me to do is to speak and have it transcribe. So what it allows me to do is I could actually hit record here and have it actually, I'll turn it on so it starts recording this webinar and it should start capturing it. So Otter will actually take everything I'm saying and transcribe it for me into text. I have it on my phone as an app. I have it call into all of my Zoom meetings. I'm actually surprised it wasn't called into this one. It automatically transcribes it to text. The number one reason I'm having it transcribe it to text is so that I can go in here. I'll go find one of these others. Here's a meeting we had yesterday, so that I can come in here and export the transcript. Because when I export the transcript, then I can come over here to ChatGPT and either copy it and paste it in here and say, here are the answers to the questions. And I can paste the whole transcript in, number 1. Number 2, I can actually just attach it as a file. So I can actually go and grab the text file. Here's the text file that just downloaded from Otter and attach it and say, attached are all the answers to your questions. The reason why this is so important, so that's option number 1. Now you could use Otter or something like it in the same way. I'll go back to it. If I was instead got my team together and I'm like, hey team, let's imagine instead, I'll jump back over this and we'll start a brand new one. imagine that I want some help to map out our culture and values for our city government. Right? This is the project I want your help on. We need to map this out, right? Sure, I can help. Here's a step-by-step guide to mapping out your culture. Again, it's going to give me feedback to say, here's the stuff. If yours doesn't do this, then you would want to turn around and say, what would you need to know to help create content that is unique and specific to our city, right? So in the same way, I'm running the same flow over. It literally doesn't matter what project I'm working on. I tell it what the project is. I give as much backstory as I can. I ask it what it needs to know to make it specific to me. I almost always will say, can you convert this into a series of interview questions that I can ask my team, converts it into a series of questions. And at this point, I can now hop on a Zoom call just like this with my team and say, hey guys, we're going to go through and answer these questions so that we can feed ChatGPT all the information about us. I might also, if we've already done some stuff, say attached is the information that we already put together about our city. Use it to adjust the questions. And I could attach our entire career site. I could attach our entire employee handbook. I could attach whatever it is that you have. I can attach it, but again, say, what's the list of questions? And so at that point, I can now record it on Zoom. I could take my Zoom audio recording and drop it into Otter, and it will automatically back here on Otter right here. I can import that and it will convert it. Just think about all the different meetings you go to, whether it's a team meeting, whether it's an interview, whether it's a one-on-one, like whether it's a manager coming to you talking about a job that they want to fill, whether it's new employee orientation. If you do new employee orientation and you are not recording it, you are missing out on one of the greatest data models of information about your city or county that you could use to push into ChatGPT to create additional content with. Because once it's recorded in audio or video, then I can turn it into text. And once I've transcribed it into text, well, I can feed it into ChatGPT. And with that information, I can now do all kinds of really cool stuff. But if I can't get it into text, I can't get it into ChatGPT. Hopefully this makes sense to everybody. So we're back. Let me jump back over to this one. So we got, I need your help with, what do you need to know? Here are my answers. Now, if you're not a prompt engineer, if you're not an expert at all the different things of what it can do, and this is actually one of the biggest takeaways I get from human resource people is, well, I don't even know where to start. I don't know what it could help me with. If I've given it all this information, I can literally say, can you give me a list of the top 10 ways that you could help me once I answer these questions? What can you do with this information? Absolutely. Once you gather the answers to questions, here's the top 10 ways I can help you. We can craft a comprehensive value statement. We can create customized onboarding materials. We can help develop engaging training programs. You see, it knows what it can do if you just ask it. Is that an eye-opener for the average person in here? It knows. I don't need to know. This is the greatest thing ever compared to, say, Excel. Imagine if you could log into Excel and talk to it and say, hey, Excel, like, I'm an HR person. I'm working on this project. What could you do to help me to make this project easier? And Excel would stop and go, well, we could build a pivot table. We could build this type of chart. We could build this type of tool. I can use these 10 formulas to calculate data for you. Like, just imagine that's what you would get if you had Excel and a super smart Excel assistant. And so that's kind of the way to think about ChatGPT is it's a content writer that is also a super smart content writing assistant. It can tell you what it can do and what it can't do or how it can do it. And so if we go kind of back to this, how can you help me? I can now say, can you write up a prompt for each of these 10 things that I can use to ask you to help me perform that task. So once again, instead of memorizing prompts, instead of buying a list of prompts, I can literally just ask it to create the prompts because it's that smart. And so this gives me an entire series of prompts that I could use to create content. So as a good example, I'm actually going to run some stuff on this and I'll show you. But I can tell you that from HR's perspective, and maybe no AI people have actually explained this to you, but here's my, I'm different than all the other AI dudes that show up. Most AI people are coming in trying to sell you their AI software to take on parts of your job and do it without you there. That's also why most people are afraid of it, because they should be. Because a piece of software that's taking a job and doing it without you in the loop anymore, you're going from it was all me to it's none of me, should be scary. It should be something that we're concerned about. It should be something that, especially if it can't explain how it makes decisions when it comes to grading interviews, when it comes to deciding who to hire, when it comes to deciding an outcome, when it comes to grading somebody's performance at work. If it can't explain how it's doing it, then it's almost utterly impossible for you to defend it in court because it can't explain it. It's just a magic black box. On the other hand, what HR really needs to hear is ChatGPT has the potential to dramatically improve your ability to create the content that you spend a lot of time creating, i.e., a series of emails or an FAQ database based off of our employee handbook. And when we think about it in those terms, that's not exactly something that takes you out of the loop. It's something where it's a magic wand, but you're the magician. And so I know that we're about out of time, so I'll show you how to go about this. Last one is to adjust it. So let me show you. I'm just going to fire open a brand new one here, and I'm going to say, I need your help to educate or create engaging educational content based on our employee handbook. I actually saw a post on LinkedIn yesterday, and somebody was talking about how do we, how long is too long of an employee handbook? And they're like, one of my clients has one that's 85 pages long. Do we actually think employees are going to read that? No, the answer is no. If it was 10 pages long, employees aren't going to read it. It's not that engaging or exciting, but most importantly, it is a bunch of information they don't need to know today. They'll need to know at some point in the future, but it's just not that exciting. So if we take this, say, sure, let's break down employee handbook. I could give it some context. Attached is my employee or our. Attached is our employee handbook. So luckily, I just happen to have one here. Let's see. I might have to search for it. Sorry, I should move this to the top of the list. Way too many files on here. We'll call it handbook. Here we go. Actually, no, that isn't it. Just 1 second. Let me find it here. Mavis. Here we go. So I can go ahead. I'm just going to move this over to my desktop so that I have it. All right. So I'm just going to attach our employee handbook. Attached is our employee handbook. This is literally the raw PDF of just a random client's employee handbook. And so we can actually run this exact process, and I'll show you how it creates our content for us. So it's attached. It's now going to think about it. It's reading this entire PDF. I don't know how long this PDF is, but it's probably fairly large. It's updating its memory and its knowledge based off it. And so it says, all right, to create engaging content, here's what it's coming up with. So it's assuming when I said creative and engaging content that I meant to space this out across weeks and break it into certain things. Once again, yours, and this is part of one of the challenges with the whole how do you defend what it's doing, most likely you'll get a different answer than I get. And the reason you get a different answer is because I put different content on my own into it. And so I can once again go back to our framework, which was I gave it I need your help with. Here's what you have, right? So that's the what do you need to know? So I can now jump right to, can you give me a of 10 ways that we could use this handbook to create engaging content? Most likely it should come back with, I could create an FAQ. I could create a weekly email series. I could create interactive workshops. I could create an infographic. I could create checklists. There's so much stuff it could do with it that would be pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and say, great, let's do number 7, FAQ database. Now, one thing to kind of show you that I'm currently in the app. So there's a big difference between, this is the web version. And I'll show you there's one main difference between the web version and what's on your phone or what gets on your computer. And it's a really, really important one. As soon as this gets done writing. So this is actually taking going, cool, we can make an FAQ database. Here's the introduction. What's the purpose of this? How can I provide feedback? Section 2 is about your employment. Section 3 is your benefits. And it's basically listing out all of the different answers, right, to each one. But this isn't a lot of information. It's just one sentence. So when I get done, you'll see right here on the bottom right is this microphone. This microphone is probably the most important part of ChatGPT as you're using it, and it's because I can speak to it instead of typing. So where before I was typing out, I'll actually show you, hopefully it holds up in Zoom. I can say, I want to create a series of FAQ articles about each of these questions. For each article, I want you to research the answer in our employee handbook that's attached above. I want you to come back with the right answer to it. I want you to quote specific sections of our employee handbook and reference what page you got the answer from. And then I want you to write up an FAQ article for that one question that follows the process of, or the framework of, what was the question? What is the backstory behind the question? What is the short answer? And then what is the long in-depth answer? And finally end with providing a reference to the handbook. So you see clearly, I wouldn't have typed that much information. I wouldn't have typed this big of an answer, but inside of this answer that's now, say, 10 times longer is a whole lot more context, right? I actually gave it, here's what I want you to do, here's how I want you to do it, and here's the output. We call this a writing framework. I want the answer to follow a specific framework. The framework is, here's the question, here's the backstory, here's the short answer, here's the more in-depth answer, and here's where it got the answer from. And I could easily say, rewrite this to be an engaging and witty email, right? And so I could literally now do this for every single one of those questions, and it's pulling from our employee handbook, right? Hey, Team Mavis, why our employee handbook is your new best friend, right? It's now going to adjust the tone of voice. It's going to write this so I could send it out to the entire team. I could make it witty. I could make it sarcastic. I could make it casual. A lot of times I will suggest I use conversational and casual tone of voice. I want it to sound like my friend was telling me about it. But you can see now here, I can go back up and say, great, come up with a list of 20 questions that could be answered with our handbook. And it's now going to give me the list of the 20 questions. So if I was building an FAQ, or if I was building a series of emails to send out to new hires, these are the 20 questions that I would most likely want to cover, right? And so I can literally now just go, great, let's use our framework, or we call it our FAQ framework from above to write the content for question number 2. And at this point, this entire thread that I've created, I can now just keep looping back and forth. Great, let's write it for question number 3. Great, let's do it for question number 4, right? And so you can literally see your guide to health and wellness benefits at Mavis. Feeling overwhelmed with new info, don't worry, we've got your back. Today, let's unravel the mystery of this, right? So the benefit of this, of content like this, is we're slowing down our training in this instance. We're making it sound more human, not robotic, like you'd think the complaint would be about AI, and not legal, like a lawyer would provide. But we're starting to create it so that it's much easier for them to use. And we might link them back to, remember, here's a link to our employee handbook. So I'll stop for a second. I know that we're on, we don't have chat going, but does that kind of make sense as far as how to engage with ChatGPT? Yeah, I got some clapping. Different than we thought it would be, right? Like this is how I use ChatGPT, y'all. If you go back over, there's a question section. Let's see. We'll open this up to questions a little bit. When is the best spot? All right, so if you jump over to your phones, I think we might have a few minutes here. I'm more than happy to stick around and answer any questions you have, but you can use your phones to ask anything you want into this, and we can answer a few. One of the big questions that I believe that will come up right off the bat, so as you're throwing an answer or question, is, well, what about our information and the privacy and the information? Do I need to upgrade? So most people using a free version of ChatGPT think the reason to upgrade is by that they get access to these other models. They're just more complex and more advanced. That's actually not the reason to upgrade to a paid version. The reason to upgrade to a paid version is the voice command and the attaching documents. And most importantly, this right here, I can actually create these workspaces. And when I create a workspace to invite my team to it, this little message shows up right here on the bottom that you might not be able to read. Refer workspace chats aren't used to train our models. So instead of paying $20 a month, you can pay $30 a month per user to get a workspace. And what it means is if you do upload content that you're worried about, it's not being added to ChatGPT's model. The other thing it allows you to do is build these little apps called GBTs. You can see them sitting right here. These GBTs allow me to create something so that it's in control, not me. I'll jump back over here. At work, best ChatGPT with no computer. Yeah, so I mean, clearly, from a work standpoint, we have IT teams that are like, we're just not going to give anybody access at all. We'll block it. Terrible solution because your employees will just use their phones. Number 2, you're much better off educating your teams on how it works instead of just blocking it or saying we're not going to use it. And so when you're thinking about those types of things, if you don't want to attach document and pay for the upgrade version, can you use a URL and a prompt and ask it to review? Sometimes it may not work as great. I would be more apt to copy and paste it in. But a lot of times, if you do have a URL, I could say research. Can you research the following URL and provide it? The fact of the matter is, like, you just need to upgrade. It's going to be much, much weaker in responding and in reviewing those. The other thing, if you are using it to Google something, you could say research the top ways to educate employees on a... So when I use the word research, it's actually going to hit Bing and go and pull that information back. But it's just not consistent is what the problem's going to be of forcing it to do things the way you want it to do it. My gut says that within, going back to it, the cost of ChatGPT paid is what, 2 cups of coffee? So if you drink your coffee at home twice a month instead of buying Starbucks, you could afford ChatGPT paid. It just, there's just not, you're basically crippling yourself in your ability to use it. Now, you could also use Gemini, and a lot of the same, are you aware of regarding ChatGPT? Major developments in legislation. For the most part, legislation right now is aimed at bias and decisions. Going back to when I was explaining, there's two ways to think about AI. AI that does things for you without you in the loop, meaning it's making decisions for you, versus AI that helps you do your job as part of you. So for the most part, I can tell you I use ChatGPT almost exclusively to create content. So job descriptions, job ads, screening questions, interview questions, training emails, newsletters for our team, all that kind of stuff. That stuff doesn't have a problem with legislation, right? Because it's no different than if I had somebody on Odesk or on Fiverr write it for me. I still need to review the content. I need to make sure it's accurate, right? Where can you go to learn more on how to use it? I actually have another webinar I'll send out to you guys that walks step by step through how to use it as an HR person. It's on YouTube. Honestly, right now, YouTube is the place to go to learn how to use it. ChatGPT is in the very early stages. It doesn't have huge training programs directly from OpenAI, and specifically, it doesn't have training programs from specific to HR. So if you just go to YouTube and say, but the most important part besides watching a video is actually getting in and using it. Like if you go back to the flow that I provided, go back and test that flow over and over again. Are there pitfalls in using it? So legislation developments, hopefully that makes sense. You can go Google. There's a ton, but most of it has to do with bias. Because when you think about it, the term that in HR, we use the term bias to mean it's discriminatory. Instead, think about it that like every human has bias inside of us, good or bad bias. We were brought up a certain way, and our history gives us a lens that we view the world, right? If you instead think about AI has bias based off of whatever knowledge was fed to it to train it on the model. So for instance, if I feed ChatGPT 100,000 job ads on Indeed, and all of those job ads are boring, then when I ask ChatGPT to write a job ad, it's going to most likely give me back a boring job ad because it's biased based off of all the job ads it consumed to make up its knowledge base. And if Grok is trained on Twitter comments and Facebook's AI is trained on messages and YouTube videos, and Google trains their AI on web pages, all of them have some type of bias in them. And you can solve for it by going in and saying, let's bias it in a different direction, which isn't exactly better because it's still creating that type of bias. In the legal world, really it's before all of our managers were biased, but they weren't all doing it the same way, and it would be very hard to prove. If you use AI to, say, interview your team, it's one source that is doing it the same way, and you need to tell me how it's doing it. So are there pitfalls in using it? It's a piece of software. So if you think about the two common pitfalls that people look at of what if I put private information up into it, I don't believe that's as big of a concern as everybody makes it out to be. Just don't put people's names and emails and social security numbers in it. But most of what HR does, if it got out, like if you were uploading performance review information about a given person, again, use the workplace. It makes it pretty safe. It's not loading it up there out in the world. And then most of the pitfalls would be the output, though, which is it lying? Is it hallucinating? Is it inaccurate? Probably the biggest pitfalls, though, I would say are by not having an adult conversation with our employees about it, by not creating, it's not a policy that we need that says don't do this because it's evolving all the time. We instead need a program where we actually bring the team together and talk about the pros and cons of AI and what it can be used for today, what it can't be used for today. And we end up with this big gray area of, okay, cool. How are we going to identify new ideas for how we could use it at work? How are we going to validate the process that says that this is a safe and responsible way to use it? How are we going to teach the team that that's the approach in the same way that you would do with email or the same way you would do, just think about this like if we're email blasting our entire population, we would most likely want to have that same thing of here's our do list when it comes to emailing, here's our don't list, and here's how we deal with and run the process of stuff we're unsure about. And so that's honestly the biggest pitfalls I can tell you right now. Isn't the pitfall of using it. It's the pitfall that leadership doesn't use it. Leadership doesn't know how it works. And therefore, leadership is either overly ambitious with what it can do or overly afraid. Instead of, you think about, imagine a company where the executives use ChatGPT more than everybody else. That is the way to kind of stay away from the pitfall. So I know that we are scheduled for an hour. Clearly, I'll stick around and answer any questions that you guys want. And like I said, I've got some additional training webinars that are on YouTube. I'll get some links to them so that you can dig in deeper and kind of learn the ways that I use it on specific things, specifically with HR. So Jody, you tell me where we're at time-wise and what you want to do next.
Does anyone have any questions? No, I think we're good. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you, Ryan, so much.
Not a problem. Thank you guys a ton. I hope you have a great rest of your day.